Good morning, friends. I'm Mike Troutman, co-pastor at the First Presbyterian Church in Ferguson, Missouri, and I'm joined by my colleagues, the Reverend Dr. Steve Langford, honorably retired in Arlington, Texas, and we welcome back the Reverend Jennifer Long from Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Corning, New York. And we're so glad to have Jen back after many weeks of intense study and reflection and spiritual training. So you may see an aura behind her back or something like that. That's what 7 weeks off gives you. So
I'm so glad someone noticed.
Yes, well, there you go. We're going to look at Mark's gospel today, and we're looking at two really fascinating and interesting stories. And Steve's going to read the first one, and Jen's going to read the second one.
These two stories are a part of a section. There's actually two others that go with it, but they're a part of a section where Jesus is in Gentile territory. And that's the key to understanding these texts. So Mark chapter 7, verse 24. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. A woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter, but he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home, found the child laying on the bed, and the demon had gone.
Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hands on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then he looked up, looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak."
So we got 20 minutes to unpack this.
Well, the first story is one that many people struggle with, especially in Matthew's account, because in Matthew's account, Jesus ignores the woman. And then he says, "No, you're nothing but a dog, and we don't give food to the dogs." And that offends people because they say that doesn't sound like Jesus. And again, for me, the key is the context that is in Gentile territory. Just before this, Jesus has dealt with the issue of what is clean versus unclean. And he says that's not the issue. The issue is what's in your heart. And then he takes the disciples into Gentile territory to deal with people that they consider to be unclean. And what he does with this woman is to mirror the disciples' attitude towards her, so that they are seeing him treat the woman the way they would treat her. In an attempt to help them see what they cannot see, or to use the second story to hear a spiritual truth they could not hear, that all are created in the image of God and are God's beloved children. So another key to interpreting this, my apologies for jumping all over this, but another key to interpreting that first story is the word dog. The Greek had two words for dog. One meant a street cur. The other meant the household pet that sat in your lap. And the word that Jesus used was the household pet. So that the woman picked up on that and said, yeah, but even the pets eat the crumbs. And so Jesus came back to embrace her and to grant her request. So the way I interpret that is that Jesus is trying to get the disciples to see something they did not want to hear or embrace.
So that's really interesting. I had a little bit of a different take on it. I was thinking about if we hang out with a certain kind of people, we become run of the crowd sometimes. That's possible. It's something I see happen to me.
Sure.
And I was seeing it less as Jesus giving an example and more of that's really where he was at. And what impresses me then about the story is that the woman says, yeah, but even the dogs get the crumbs. And in doing that, for me, it was seeing that Jesus has the potential to change his mind. Mm-hmm. She asked the question and he doesn't ignore it or fly by it. He really listens. And it slows his roll and he shifts, he pivots, kind of like that storm that was coming. And I thought, isn't that amazing? And that it is then followed by somebody who was deaf. I found myself thinking, what does it take to get a person to hear? And what does it look like to struggle with hearing? And that's not just something that Jen does, but that's even something that Jesus, who I work in the limited way I am able to follow, that even Jesus struggled with that. So that's something I was playing with.
Yeah. So in the way that I'm interpreting it, the deaf man represents the disciples. Here's something they could not hear, what Jesus was wanting to say about the Gentiles. And that's reinforced in the next story where Jesus feeds the 4,000 and contrast that with the feeding of the 5,000. In the feeding of the 5,000, at the end of the day, the disciples come to Jesus and say, you need to send these folks away. They need something to eat. In the feeding of the 4,000, which are Gentiles, after 3 days, the disciples have said nothing. And finally, Jesus says, I have compassion on these folks. You need to feed them. So again, it is that Gentile, that attitude towards Gentiles that is being addressed in this section of Mark's gospel, which the disciples who are the deaf man don't want to hear. And that, Jen, goes right back to what you were saying. What is it that we don't hear? And what keeps us from hearing? And what is interesting in that second story is that because they couldn't hear, the man couldn't hear, he couldn't speak clearly. So when we don't hear the truths of God, what we say is not necessarily the truth of God. It's not clear. It's not a clear statement of God's truth.
It's also a very telephone-esque experience. You guys have played telephone before, right?
Oh my, yes.
Yeah.
Somebody starts off with a phrase and you have to whisper it. So because you may or may not be speaking clearly when you whisper, by the time it gets to the end of the line, you're like, yeah, that's not at all what I said.
Yeah, I think, my interpretive bent on that, and especially as framed by Matthew, is that, this is an example. I kind of fall in the Jen camp. But what I like about the story is that how you both use it, and it's helpful in different contexts. And that there's an opportunity to hear this word multiple ways. There's just not one meaning.
Yes.
But it can be used in multiple ways. And I guess the other thing that you said, Steve, that kind of triggered something for me was the fact that one of the things I love about Mark's gospel is that it tends to be direct and quick to the point. And this whole what scholars call the messianic secret, that Jesus tells them not to say anything,
Yeah.
everything that they see. They're not to say anything. And I think for me, what Mark brilliantly does there is that, you can see all this stuff about Jesus. You can see all that what Jesus does, but you don't quite understand the totality of it until it comes to the point where Jesus is on the cross and the centurion looks out and says, truly, this must be the Son of God. It frames the whole thing in a different way. Jesus is saying, quiet, take time, learn. I'm not someone you can put in a box. And I think Mark doesn't put Jesus in the box. He really just kind of opens up that box for us to have space to kind of think about who Jesus is and what he's about. And then as a result, who we are to be if we're going to be his followers.
I want to play with that idea of messianic secret, because I've always thought, Jesus said, be quiet about it because people weren't accepting. And now I'm wondering, was it about it being secret, or was it about encouraging the disciples or whomever he was talking to really get clear in themselves? If I've got something coming at me that's confusing, I want to sit down and talk with Steve and Mike about it and say, like, okay, help me unconfuse this, which can get in the way of me doing my own thinking about it. And I lean into what somebody else thinks instead of going, I've got the ability to think about this and get clear on it. I don't know. I don't know that would be possible at all, but I think for me, it is an interesting possibility to think about.
Yeah, I think
His
again
mother
that, go ahead, Jen.
pondering things, like his mother Mary pondering things in her heart.
Yeah, I think it just gives us space and time to take a step back from what we think we know to see what the story really is kind of shaping us in a certain way. I've always seen the Gospels as attempts by the Gospel writers not to tell history or even give a biography of Jesus, but to provide stories and insights into the life of Jesus and arranged in a certain way that helps the community of faith deal with where they're at, what's going on in their lives. And that becomes adaptable and amenable to each era, each situation, time era, for others to do the same thing. What do I think about this? How do I see it? Am I upset that Jesus kind of talked dismissively to the woman? Or do I feel protective of Jesus and I need to clean up his language for him? Or can I live somewhere in between those and hear my own, as you say, the way I jump into a crowd and kind of blend in and meld in, so I can kind of skate by in life?
We definitely are influenced by the larger crowd. That is truth. And so the question becomes, how does that cause us to violate our own principles, what we say is truth?
Or not even think about my own principles. If I'm being carried by the crowd, have I even thought about whatever we're carrying me towards? Do I even have a principle about that? Or is it just so important to me to be a part of the crowd? And I would love to be like, well, I'm an older sister and I've never been like that. But quite frankly, that's a bunch of garbage. I've been like that. And I value that. I value being a part of groups.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so the question is, can I value that along with do my own work? So that
how do we balance the two?
Yeah.
So that we live out of our own truth and yet stay connected with the crowd.
Although I think it might be a little simpler if I would just live out of your truth, Steve. I'm just saying.
That's why cult leaders are so important. They kind of give you a narrative and a story. and you don't have to think about your truth. But this Jesus guy is a little different cat, isn't he? You know, he kind of throws these curveballs in here all over the place. And as we reflect back, I think you look at the life of the church, and it is a struggle to find our genuine voice with Jesus. You know, doesn't come to us through one lens. It comes through us through a variety of different lenses that invites us to do our own thinking the best we can.
And he's constantly calling us beyond the popular groupthink, but also calling us beyond what we already think, which was shaped by the group. See, the disciples' view towards the Gentiles was shaped by their culture. That's groupthink. And so Jesus is calling them beyond that group thinking, which requires them to hear truth they did not want to hear.
Yep. Or the woman causes Jesus to move beyond groupthink and
Yeah.
say, "Oh, what do you think, Jesus? Well, hey, this is a child of God. Huh. You know, she's a Gentile. Yeah. So what am I going to do about it? What does God have me do?" And I like that. I mean, I like playing with that in my own heart and mind. And, you know, I have to listen to the crowd, because if I don't, I just become insular and cut off. So I have to be connected, but I also have to be connected in such a way that I have access and the ability to take a step back and maybe do something different and think different.
And what's it going to take? What woman's comeback comment will it take for us to come up short to do that thinking, to shift out of the group think?
So, Jen, what woman's comment? Just saying. I always find that I struggle with that because my go-to place is I am not one of them. And I would
Right.
say more often than not, I am in fact one of them. So how to remember not how they are different from me, but how do I remember how they're alike from me? And how does that shape the disciple I'm hoping I'm living as?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's the richness of such texts that make me excited or give me hope for the Jesus movement. You know, I have hope in my own personal expression of Jesus as Lord and Savior, but it also gives me hope that the movement is flexible and has the ability to challenge us from a variety of different perspectives and invite us then to do our work with others and you know, be a part of the healing of the gospel in this world, instead of just one that, as we see the church does so many times, just run over people with moral dictates. And, you know, this is the way the message is supposed to be. This is Jesus' message. And if you're not on board with that, then you're not on board with Jesus.
And when we become that rigid in our thinking, when we become established, it ceases to be a movement, it ceases to be a journey, and it's become an institution of power, which is a power play.
Even in us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The church kind of is an institution, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Created to be a spiritual community pursuing a way of life, and we institutionalized it. So it became power.
That's what we do. But, you know, at least from the Presbyterian perspective, you know, we say to ourselves, we don't always follow, but we're reformed, meaning that's our perspective of the institution, but we're always reforming. That the institution needs to be challenged and adapted and reworked within a structure, I would say.
The second part of that is the most difficult, reforming,
Yeah. Well,
because that requires constant self-awareness, self-examination, openness to move further.
yeah. And the fact to admit you're wrong sometimes, just
Yeah.
flat out wrong.
Yeah, which is what the disciples' attitude towards the Gentiles was, just flat out wrong.
Yeah, but understandable.
Yeah, well, sure. It's
Yeah,
how we all establish our identity. I'm not like them.
yeah.
Yet, as Jennifer says, we are.
So what one last nugget of wisdom does the panel want to impart to our listeners for today? There's one thing or a succinct way of kind of summarizing where you're at, what would you do?
I think I would say, what's it take to slow my roll long enough to be able to see and hear what's actually there?
Steve?
Mine would be it's like the deaf man, what truth would the Spirit be teaching me that I don't want to hear? That I need Jesus to unstop my ears so I can hear it.
Yeah. And I think mine would revolve around the sense that I want to be present to others and to myself in ways that lead to be a better follower of Jesus.
Yep. Including those strange Syro-Phoenician people that are different from us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So friends, I hope you got something from this. Food for thought. And so, Steve, you going to pray us out?
Let's pray us out. So merciful and gracious God, we give you thanks for who you are, for your embrace of us in all of our journey and our fumbling and our inabilities to hear. We thank you for the richness of the scriptures that help us to get glimpses of you as well as to see ourselves. So help us to hear your truth that sets us free. Help us to be open to hearing, unstop our ears so that our tongues might proclaim your truth with clarity, is our prayer in the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right, friends, thanks a lot.
The peace of Christ.
And next week, take care.
Peace.